Good afternoon. It's Tuesday. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, and welcome to Advancement Live. Advancement Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in our archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be a part of our broadcast by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. You can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter, and I am tweeting a link to that newsletter out as we speak. Welcome. I'm your host, Andrew Gosen. Social media is everywhere this month. It's Social Media Month on Higher Ed Live. South by Southwest is fully underway, that being the launching ground for both Twitter and Foursquare. The CASE Social Media Conference is taking place next week, and that takes me back to the first CASE Social Media and Community Conference back in 2010, when it seemed like the key question on everybody's mind was, should we get involved in social media? That question, I'm glad to say, has been answered in the affirmative. As we heard from Michael Stoner and Cheryl Slover-Lynette back in the fall, this past year's CASE M. Stoner Huron Consulting Survey indicates that over 95% of colleges and universities in North America have some sort of social media presence. And that is a number that, from the perspective of 5 years ago, seems absolutely staggering. More and more advancement professionals are using social media tools on behalf of their institutions, and that is a really, really good thing. However, higher ed still trails the pace of adoption of social media tools in the private sector, as well as the investment that many private sector firms and agencies are making in support of taking full advantage of the potential of interactive digital media. Can higher ed learn something from what's happening in the private sector? Are there unique strengths that higher ed enjoys that we take for granted? These questions are at the core of today's show. But before we dive in, I want to give a shout out to our Advancement Live sponsors, iModules and M. Stoner. iModules software is the leading constituent engagement management provider for educational institutions. iModules delivers an integrated online platform that transforms how institutions strengthen constituent relationships and achieve fundraising success. iModules, we thank you for your support, and we couldn't do this without you. Higher Ed Live is also produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and much, much more. And now, let's get on with the show. One of the nice side effects of the growth of social media in nonprofits and the private sector is that there is increasing opportunity to transition from one space to the other. And we're taking full advantage of that on today's show. Our guests both moved to private sector jobs from higher ed social media jobs, and today they are going to share some thoughts with us on the differences between the two spaces, the aspects of private sector work that higher ed might be able to learn from, and the things that higher ed is doing well. They're outside of higher ed right now, but they bring an insider's perspective to the show, and I think that we're going to have a really fun conversation. First up is Ian Shea-Caher. Ian is Public Relations and Social Media Manager for Essence of Australia, but his higher ed experience comes from Princeton University. Ian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So could we start with having you give us a quick overview of the sort of work you did at Princeton?
At Princeton, I was a social media strategist and also wrote for the Office of Communications. I handled all of the main university accounts at Princeton, the Princeton University Facebook page, as well as our Instagram, and when we moved into Google+, I helped start that. On the other side, I also helped with kind of herding the cats and coordinating all the people who handled social media in some way on throughout the university. I think when I left, we had somewhere around 220 accounts across the campus, and we ran a monthly group of people, upwards of 75 to 100. Basically, anyone who had to do social media, we ran a monthly group that I led.
What were some of the things that you did there that you're most proud of in retrospect?
I think the biggest thing that we did was, one of the issues that I saw there and that I see in the private sector as well is you try to decide who your audience is, and I know in higher ed that's one of the big questions. Is it students? Is it alumni? Is it stakeholders? Is it your peers? Excuse me. And one of the things that I was most proud that we did was we were able to kind of without siloing, we were able to bring people into the table from around the university, bring the departmental accounts into the fold strategically with the main university accounts, so that there was both content traveling upward as well as downward, so that depending on what your audience was and who you were really trying to speak to, we had a little bit of something somewhere within our ranks. Our idea was we didn't care where you got our information or where you got the content from us, as long as you got it from something with a Princeton logo on it.
What were some of the main challenges that you faced trying to get people working together in that way?
Well, as anyone in higher ed knows, every department and every school and every administration has its own strategic goals and the things that it cares about more than others, and those are not always in line with each other. We often had to deal with the time of year when, for the Office of Communications, we were focused on admissions or on brand management, whereas other parts of the university were not. So we're focused on certain pieces of research or grant writing or funding or other things like that. So really, the concept of herding cats really was our biggest challenge, because we just had so many people doing so many things. It took a lot of work to try and get people moving somewhat in the same direction.
And I guess in higher ed, you've got an unusual challenge in that each of the cats is pretty convinced that they're right?
You know, these are smart people. You know, I worked at working at a place like Princeton. You know, most of the people I talked to went to better schools than I did. So it was interesting. But you know, going back to what I'm proud of, we did a good job of making sure that it wasn't about the people, it was about the place. And one of the things that we did well, and I think they're still doing well at Princeton, is to bring that idea to what can essentially be a very personal medium.
So Ian, thank you. Before I turn to Annie with the same set of questions about her higher ed background, could you share with us a little bit about what you're currently doing with Essence of Australia?
Yeah. So I actually left higher ed 2 years ago. And first moved to a financial services company and worked there. And believe me, to all of our higher ed viewers, if you think dealing with privacy in higher ed is difficult, try working in financial services in social media. That is a sticky wicket, to say the least. Currently, I'm working for a bridal gown company called Essence of Australia. I know it'll sound funny, but it's I actually grew up in the bridal industry, and my family owned a bridal shop for many years, so I know more about organza than most guys should, and so we're really the big thing here was that this company really just opened its social media presence in January 1st of this year, so it was an opportunity to bring what I know about social to a company that's starting from scratch, essentially, and start on the ground floor and really build something for our brands.
So it's a company that's started in Australia but has a global footprint, so you're really servicing the global audience.
Correct. It began in Australia. We have offices in Australia. We have offices in the UK. Our headquarters is actually here in the Kansas City area, funnily enough. And so, you know, while the US market is our largest market, we do deal with a global audience, which is something I had to deal with at Princeton as well.
Ian, thank you. We're going to move on to Annie for just a second, and then we'll bring the two of you back together to talk about some of the issues that we have on the table. So we turn now to Annie Knoll. Annie is a senior channel manager, social media, at VML, which is a digital marketing and advertising agency in Kansas City. She got her higher ed experience doing social media for Ottawa University. And Annie, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So to start off with, could you tell us a little bit about your work at Ottawa?
Yes, I worked at Ottawa back in 2009 to 2011, which seems so long ago right now. My boss was really forward-thinking, and she hired a social media specialist and an SEO manager at the same time. We were the first at Ottawa to have those positions, And ultimately, it was my job to help bring in new students. And I set up their first ever social accounts, got them on Facebook and Twitter, and I was really a steward and integrating it throughout the campus communications program.
Fantastic. What were some of the highlights of your time there? I know you did some really interesting work involving students producing video.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're back now. You cut out there for just a second. What were some of the highlights of your time there in Ottawa?
Yeah, that was a really big part of my. Back now, okay, good. When I think back, I'm really proud of all the content creation we did with students. I really felt passionately that using the student experience and using the voices of the students was a great way to bring in new students, essentially. If you could see how much fun they were having, what a great community experience it was, what a great education they were having, then things that I did was put together this student group of students with all different majors and all different activities, and we called them Braves TV. The Braves was the mascot, and we made all sorts of fun videos. We did a flash mob. We did video diaries. I think the main point of that is it wasn't just video diaries. It wasn't just a flash mob. It was putting great content out onto the web that potential students would be interested in.
So it's almost peer-to-peer marketing in a sense, and that you're featuring student voices talking to prospective students.
Mm-hmm.
Great. What were some of the challenges that you faced trying to get all of this off the ground?
And we got great engagement. We really did.
Were there any particular challenges that you faced as you were trying to get this off the ground?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think my internet connection's a little bit slower than you guys are talking, so stay with me.
Sure.
When I look back, I think social media is in a much better place now to serve the needs of what Ottawa needed me for than it was back then. A lot of the challenges I faced were a lot of misunderstanding of the value of what we were doing among the faculty and the administrators, and we were creating content and putting strategic plans around something that wasn't quite evolved yet. I mean, and what I mean by that is Facebook and Twitter both know much more now about what drives in business than they did at that time. And it was completely organic when I was doing it back then, and now you really need paid dollars to make your message stand out and target the audience that you want. So I think that, in all honesty, if I were to go back to Ottawa now, I'd be able to offer them a lot more value than we did a couple years ago, just because the platforms have changed so much and evolved, and they know what they're good at now.
And I think there's also a certain amount of realization on the part of higher ed that this wasn't in fact a fad, and that we all took this bold leap into the social media space, and the sun continued to rise in the east every morning. And there's just less anxiety about the whole idea than there was even 2 years ago. So could you tell us more about your current role at VML?
Yes, I have a lot of passion for VML. It's always been my dream to work at a large agency like VML, and I'm a social strategist and in the channel department, and channel is really unique to VML. The channel is full of social strategists, ECRM, SEO, and media, and mobile. And the thinking behind channel is that the best ideas happen are executed in a channel. So my job is to work with the creative team and our clients to make their ideas come to life in the best way possible for the channels that I'm an expert in, which are social. So I've got to work on some really great clients at VML. I've worked on Stella Artois, and then after that, Miller Coors brands, including Coors Light. So I was the community manager for Coors Light for a while. If you talk to us on Twitter, it was me talking back to you, actually. And then I moved on to Wendy's, and now I work across several Kellogg's brands.
Great. Let's bring Ian back into the conversation now and tackle a number of interesting questions here. To start with, could I ask you each for your thoughts on the main differences between doing social media in higher ed and the private sector? Mm-hmm. Annie, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, sure. For me, a big difference is I think higher ed uses a lot of its people to sell its service or its product, and with what I do now with CPG or QSR, it's all about a product. So that's a big difference. And then another big difference that I would say is process. You know, VML we have a lot of big clients, and our big clients work with a lot of other big agencies like TV. So we have to work closely with the TV agency. With a lot of times it's another agency that is buying media for a client. A lot of times it's another agency that is doing public relations. So we all have to work together in an integrated process to fulfill the goals of our client.
Okay, so you're talking about a truly integrated digital ecosystem.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Ian, what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, there are two big differences for me. First is that metrics are much more firm in the private sector business world than they are in higher ed. Higher ed, you know, as I mentioned before, you have multiple masters. Is it about admissions? Is it about recruitment? Is it about advancement? Is it about alumni? And so you have so many of those things that you're trying to meet all at the same time or along with each other that it often is different. It's often difficult to bring a lot of ROI metrics to that. Whereas for me, it's very simple. I know what I consider a conversion. I know what I consider good for us, which is more dresses going on to more brides. But that leads to the other difference between the two is that, you know, when I was working in higher ed, social media was considered part of a communication strategy, whereas in private business, it's part of a marketing or advertising strategy. And there are some slight differences in the two. You know, we're not trying to. Our engagement has more of a specific behavioral end goal than it did in higher ed. In higher ed, it's just about in some ways it was about keeping you on the line. In private business, it's about pushing you toward an end spot.
Could I ask you both? I'm interested in this particular topic, the whole notion of the difference between communications and marketing/advertising, and it feels to me like a certain element of that relates to the brand itself. I know that one of the reasons that higher ed seemed to have such a slow pace of adoption was that they were worried about how this was going to impact on the brand. But there, of course, your brand is this institutional entity that in some cases has been around for 250 years. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about how you think differently about brand in a sales and marketing context versus a communications context? You
know, I'll jump in first here. You know, I think there actually can be a lot of crossover There can be a lot of crossover in the tools that you actually use. For instance, at Princeton, we built a Princeton voice. We built a Princeton persona. If you spoke at Princeton on Twitter, it didn't matter which of us was going to speak. You were going to get the same voice. In many ways, that mirrors what you're going to do in a marketing or brand management kind of structure outside. The difference is when I was working at Princeton and bantering back and forth with someone on Twitter, the end goal was, thinking about the people who were actually outside of that conversation and looking in on it. That this may expand the brand in a positive fashion, with the results of that being somewhat squishy. Whereas with what I'm doing now, what I've been doing in the private sector, it very much is everything that I say is geared toward getting you to our website, getting you to our store locator page, getting you to a financial advisor, or whatever it is that I'm trying to put you toward. And so it just adjusts the language that you use just slightly. It adjusts the way that you will interact with someone. I don't necessarily jump into as many conversations now as I would have at Princeton, because there's always there's more risk involved. And I think that's something that higher ed didn't always see. There was this perception that there was a lot of risk in interacting with people, and I would hope that what people have learned over the last 3 to 4 years is that interacting with people in higher ed is actually good almost all of the time.
Well, especially if you think about how much of the value proposition of higher ed relates directly to the people you're going to engage with at the institution, right?
Yeah.
To a certain extent, showcasing your people, showcasing the individual voices is one of the best selling points.
Yeah, and I think this goes to Annie's point from the work that she did at Ottawa. You know, so much of the work that we did at Princeton, and I know the work that she did at Ottawa, was bringing out the students, involving the students, involving the faculty, and that's not always something that you're going to see. Not every company is right for putting their CEO on Twitter. Not every company is right for putting the namesake of their company on Twitter. So Annie, that's I know that's a lot of what you've done.
So Annie, what's your take on this topic?
Well, I cut out a little bit. I lost my internet connection.
Sure. Yeah, we were talking about the brand and how you think about brands differently when you're serving a communications function versus a marketing/sales function.
Yeah. So social, where I am now at VML, is very much about branding, and it's very much about targeting the right audience with the right message at the right time, and it's very important that for the success of social that we be extremely integrated with the campaigns that are going on, and with the business goals of the brand, and not have social be a tack on or something that's been thought of after the fact. Oh, maybe we should put a hashtag on that, or maybe we should, put a post on Facebook. It's very much an integrated brand strategy, which is something I work on every day, which is definitely different than a communications strategy.
I think that there can be there's some difference too with between what Annie's doing with an agency and what I'm doing with an actual brand, because what I've seen coming out of higher ed is a lot of what we did in social at Princeton was basically educating people within our offices, within communications offices around campus, about the fact that social wasn't a tack on or shouldn't be a tack on, and that's a real cultural shift. Agencies, if you're working with an agency, that's their goal, is to come at you, is to bring you as a brand an integrated plan. With us, one thing that's been interesting is that before I started here, the company has been working with an agency in some ways, but there is that kind of integration. So that integration period exists here much in the way that it did. So that's one way that they're the same. Is that we're learning that our print materials, our ad budgets, what we're doing, it's not separate, and they need to be thought of. They need to be thought of as a whole, in a much more holistic way.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting. So Ian, it sounds like you're serving a role vaguely similar to what you served at Princeton in terms of showing Essence how social can work for them. Am I reading you correctly there?
In some ways, yeah. I think luckily this is a company that sees and I do some outside consulting work too, and that's a lot of what I'm doing is teaching people who have small in that role, teaching people who have one-person or two-person marketing departments how to integrate social media into what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, rather than to think of it as Annie said, or as I know that people all across higher ed have heard. Okay, we've got a great story up on the homepage now. Oh yeah, we probably should put something on Facebook. Yeah, and that to be frank, that was something that I learned during my final days as a journalist in 2005 and 2006. We had that same discussion in the newsroom where it was, okay, we've got a great story. Oh yeah, let's think about putting it on the website before it appears. Yeah, it's an evolutionary process that luckily I've been able to kind of follow through many of the eras.
And Annie, since you're sitting on the agency side, do you have many situations where you begin working with a client and you have to do work trying to secure buy-in from all of their various different business units that this is a good idea? Or are they already sold on the idea of digital before they start working with you?
That's an interesting question. Well, okay, first of all, the clients that I work with, most of the time, they very much understand the value of social. They very much, when you get at the level of where these brands are, especially like when I was working on Wendy's, they have a very young target audience, and if you're not going to target them on social, it's a huge mistake. Wendy's was fantastic to work with in that it really wasn't as big a part of my job to prove the value of social, and I would say that that's not even the value what I do now, and quite frankly, I'm tired of that fight, and would rather not work with clients that don't believe in the value of social or don't believe in being where your audience is. Contemporary digital strategy now isn't about taking people to your website. It's about, I mean, I guess for some e-commerce brands it is, but I don't work with a lot of e-commerce brands at this time. It's about being where your consumers are. So a lot of times most recently, my biggest battles are proving now that social media is not an organic way to, I mean, you shouldn't use it organically anymore, essentially. The Facebook newsfeed is crowded, for one thing. Twitter, a tweet can be gone in 7 seconds. You need paid media support to make your messages last and to target your audience. So that's my biggest challenge these days, is really getting people and our clients to understand that you got to pay to be on social.
So go ahead, Ian.
No, that is at its core, that ends up being one of the biggest differences too from the higher ed world to the private world. In the end, higher ed, you're not going to pay tons of money for campaigns, because the idea is that this has to be. Most universities, or the bigger universities, the more respected universities, they're not going out buying TV commercials. They're not going to be advertising or marketing. What they do is put out brochures and pamphlets and use and really trade on their name and their reputation. And that's something that you can do in higher ed, that you can be the most respected brand in the Forbes 500. You're still going to have to spend some money to get to the top of the feed in social.
Yeah, they really need to understand you have brands, huge brands that are paying millions of dollars for the attention of their target audience in the newsfeed on Facebook, or to be at the top of a Twitter keyword search, and they're going to fall behind and social's not going to work for them unless they understand that they need to use paid media to get their message to stick.
Can you imagine a world in which higher ed actually realizes they have to start budgeting for this? Because it feels like even if we were to make a principled stance that we're higher ed and that's not how we're going to play the game, if all of the big private brands are beginning to pay for promoted posts and
which they are.
Well, there's only 100% of space in a newsfeed, right? So eventually the non-promoted brands are going to get edged out by the promoted brands, and that's just
they absolutely are. They absolutely are. We talk regular. We have a great relationship with Facebook and Twitter and Google and all the platforms here at VML. And I was talking to our Facebook reps last week, and at any one moment, the Facebook newsfeed can serve up 2,000 pieces of content to one user, but it chooses around 300. And your brand message is fighting for space against baby photos, wedding pictures, news articles, and it's just, we all need to move beyond the days where we try to game the system. And what I mean by that is, messing with EdgeRank and trying to guess what it's going to give you if you post at a certain time, or things like that. You need to move beyond that now.
Just really quick, one of the most interesting things that I've ever seen happened over the weekend when I was watching a soccer game on TV, and it was the LA Galaxy game out in Los Angeles, obviously. And along the little digital boards along the field that show advertisements throughout the game, one of the boards that came up was the University of California. And so, that's not something that you would have seen 5 years ago. I mean, I know UC is different than a lot of universities, but it is interesting to me to see that kind of background organic advertising, quote unquote organic advertising is already starting to happen, and I can only imagine that will move into the the Twitterverse at some point.
So we've been talking a lot here about questions of ROI and getting attention. Could you share with us a little bit about what sorts of tools you use to measure buzz, to monitor the brand, how you make decisions about what tools are worth the investment and what tools are not? You want to tackle that first?
Yeah, since I've worked at multiple brands now. I've used Sprout Social, I've used Radian 6. Currently, because at Essence, our big thing is Pinterest, because that's what. And when women are looking for wedding dresses, they pin them all. So we're using an app called Tailwind to follow that, and really, there's no one. I've not found one solution that works perfectly for every platform, and so it's kind of become a bit of alchemy to put together your Google Analytics along with Tailwind, along with Sprout Social, and you get all of this and really build it into. It's all the jigsaw pieces that pull into a real ROI metrics puzzle.
I think that I have a different experience in that it's different. At an agency, people are very centered in their specialties. So my specialty is strategy. It is not currently, my focus is not on insights. So we have a whole department for that, and they use a whole bunch of sophisticated tools, even an in-house proprietary tool that we have that they are developing to give us insights and data on how all of our content's running and sentiment and all that. So I'm not an expert on even what tools they're using right now, but I do have to say that going back to the ROI question, we recently had a data logic study done for one of our brands, and I don't know if you're familiar with data logics, they have partnered with Facebook and Twitter to determine the value of your marketing on those channels. And so we had one done for Facebook and for 2 of our brands, and 2 of them came back with sales increases. And so, but it was interesting, one of them didn't have an exact return on ROI. I think we had like 53 cents to our dollar or something like that. And what could have increased our ROI on Facebook was an increase in ad frequency on the platform, because this brand is one that has very low awareness. It's a newer brand. And so a key to increasing the ROI with Facebook was to increase the frequency with how often our target audience was shown our post. So so that was a really long answer to your question. but
it was a good answer. It was a good answer.
Okay.
I will
Yeah.
I will chime in with just one little thing. For metrics, I will say to almost now that I've been outside of this world, if all you're using is Facebook Insights and something, some basic field, some basic Twitter monitoring and Pinterest analytics, you're not getting a full enough picture to be able to actually see what's going on. I'm a big, I don't like spending other people's money, but I'm a firm believer in finding the tool that gives you the best picture of what's going on. And as much as insights have gotten better, they still don't show you that entire stream from the beginning on Facebook to your website or to whatever you consider a goal.
Yeah, you definitely want to work with a company that's a Facebook preferred marketing developer, and Twitter has something that's the equivalent to them, because they can get the full fire hose to those platforms to give you a lot better data.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and the only thing that I worry about when you see higher ed institutions get all excited about data and prepare to make an investment is that they sometimes don't follow that chain of logic through to its conclusion, which is that you can have all the data in the world, and if you don't have somebody who has the time and the skills to interpret the data, you might as well not have wasted the money to start with, right?
Totally agree with you on that. And that's why it's taken me a long time to be able to read the data properly and to be able to put it together properly. And in most cases, I've been a pretty small shop, but the idea still exists out there that, ooh, we have 20 more likes on our Facebook page, that's success. And any of us who've worked in social media know that the numbers that are in administrative spaces are the ones that are often the ones that are the ones that are often the least important to us in terms of actual marketable success.
You have anything you want to add on that front, Annie?
No, I think that, what's interesting is you mentioned 20 likes, and we recently got, we recently got Facebook is really changing a lot. They're really changing a lot in their value proposition. They're really positioning themselves as a tool to help businesses reach their goals. And to do that, you need targeted reach beyond your fan base. And they have told us that they've even sent us recently a white paper that basically says, engagement is great, but we have found that it is not an indicator that somebody is going to buy, and that it is not an indicator of the success of your marketing post on the platform, because what they found through the data logic studies is that not everybody engages differently, and that it's not an engagement isn't an indicator necessarily of always what you think you want it to be.
So So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the social media use case. You both now have a substantial amount of experience in the private sector, and I've got sort of twin related questions. One of them is are there any private sector techniques that you think could be adapted by higher ed in a way that would substantially enhance higher ed social media activity at a price point that's conceivable? And the flip side of that coin is, are there any things you think that higher ed is doing really well or could be doing really well that we're not taking as much advantage of as we could be? Annie, do you want to start off with that?
Yeah. So, you know, the biggest, since I moved to VML, I really try to take a full marketing picture behind what I do behind social. I don't consider myself just a social media expert. So I think where I want to go with that is a big mistake I see a lot with higher ed agencies or higher ed companies, at least in the Kansas City area, is their brands aren't differentiated from each other. And I think that I see a billboard every day when I drive home from work. You could take out the person's T-shirt that they're wearing and put on another school's T-shirt, and it would be the exact same message. So I think that higher ed really needs to learn to differentiate themselves from their competition, and I don't think that their value proposition can always be, I'm a hornet, come be a hornet with me, or something like that. So with that being said, I think that higher ed can learn from brands that of having social be really a strategic, weaved-in piece to your campaigns. And I think that what that means tactically is don't focus on posting every day. Don't focus on trying to fill up a calendar. Make posts when you can have an impact, when it's important for your business, and integrate that with the rest of your messaging, whether it be out of home, print, TV, and the rest of your digital. So don't post just to post. Share better moments on your channels. That would be some of the advice I have.
Great, thanks. Ian?
Yeah, I think to kind of echo one of the things that Annie said, and I do agree that in the Kansas City area, all the schools end up sounding alike. The only way you can tell the difference is the colors. One of the things that was the most interesting about working in the Ivy League is how much there's a keeping up with the Joneses mentality towards social, not just towards social media, but communication and brand management in general. Everyone wants to be that place in Cambridge, Mass, or everyone wants to be Princeton, or everyone wants to be like Yale. And so what ends up happening is, instead of thinking differently about how your university can stand out from that group, it ends up being, oh, look at what they're doing, why aren't we doing that? And so you end up setting yourself up to play catch up rather than to really do something great. Like, I not to name check anyone, but like Cara Russo is doing over at Duke. They do a lot of stuff differently than other universities do, and it's served them well and really gives them a different look than many of the other schools that would be considered on that level. I don't want to go negative though. I think we've mentioned it a couple of times, and one thing that higher ed, the schools that are doing social media well on higher ed are really doing well is using this vast amount of free or at least cheap resources that they have. When I want to put someone in a video, I have to go through clearances, I have to find a focus group, I have to maybe hire an actor, I have to worry about many different things that are going to affect my budget to put someone in a 30-second 30-second commercial or a 3-minute video or something. Even just some social behind-the-scenes thing that we want to do. Whereas, you have thousands of students and hundreds of faculty members who really, it should be shown as a value. Being involved in your university's social media program should be seen as a value proposition for them as well. This is something that helps them, that helps a student build their brand as they're going out to find a job. It's something that helps a faculty member get in more touch with the people who respond to their grants and give them funding. If you're not on social media, then really you're nowhere. And so, higher ed is doing a good job of utilizing that free or cheap labor force that they have to be able to, but in order to continue doing that, in order to continue growing that, it needs to be couched as a value proposition for the people who are getting involved as well.
Following up on that idea, to what extent do you think that taking full advantage of that incredible sort of resource that you have right there at your fingertips on a university campus, to what extent do you need to have really good top-notch, or sorry, not top-notch, top-level leadership sort of endorsing the use of social for that to really fully take root? I think of President Ono at the University of Cincinnati, who's one of the university presidents who I think is absolutely at the forefront of being out there all the time doing his own piece to promote whatever event he's at. What are your thoughts on the need for senior leadership to model the behavior that we'd like to see? It wasn't integral 3 years ago. I think it is absolutely necessary now. In large part because the audience, especially the student audience, well, not just the student audience, the alumni audience is obviously getting, the alumni audiences are obviously getting younger and getting more tech savvy as more people graduate who are part of this generation. And your potential students are younger and more connected than ever. I think about my 13 and 11-year-old kids, and the integration that they had that I could have only dreamed of, and how it's not for these kids and for these younger alumni. It's no longer a hey, that's kind of cool. It's not an oddity. It is now a necessity for them to be part of it. So it doesn't have to be every leader. There needs to be buy-in, and not every leader needs to be on Twitter, but it doesn't hurt, and some kind of presence on that level needs to happen.
Yeah, I think from my experience, the clients that I've had the most success with social have been when there is definitely a strong excitement and buy-in and willingness to experiment on behalf of the client. And then even internally, we've seen more success with social when it's not handled by the junior account manager. It's the group account director is heavily involved with the success of it and can help me be working with the right people inside our account team to bring success. So I definitely agree that, and that was something that I didn't have at Ottawa. I didn't have support, and it was very difficult, to make things happen. And so I find it, like Ian said, it's very integral. It's very integral to the success of social for buy-in from the top.
So Ian, you briefly mentioned that Duke is doing a particularly nice job with social. Are there any other colleges or universities or nonprofit organizations that you all think are doing social right from the vantage point of where you sit as sort of leading private sector practitioners?
Yeah, I recently came across this. I don't know if it was a campaign or just something that they're doing. Texas, University of Texas has this hashtag. I think it's hashtag Gone Texas or Gone to Texas, and I think the name of that hashtag is a throwback to an old saying within the state of Texas. But regardless, they were using that hashtag on their admittance letters. So when students got their acceptance letters, they had that hashtag on it, and they were taking pictures with the hashtag was written in bold letters across the back of their admittance letter, I think, and said hashtag gone to Texas. And the students were so excited to take their picture and announce to all their friends who I'm sure consist of several hundred high school students, that they got into Texas. And I just felt it was a great moment for Texas to tap into. And I'm sure there's other universities taking advantage of that too. But I really felt that was a really smart way to get some buzz going around the university.
Well, it's like you're giving them a cue to take the selfie, right?
Yes, exactly,
like that. Cool.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of what they've been doing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for the last couple of years as well. I know I'm not going off the board with that. Unfortunately, nonprofits are not doing as good a job as they could, and I'm not saying that to slam nonprofits. I think from what I know, and from my experience in going out into the private sector, and frankly, when I was looking at jobs, they just don't they're not in the position, most of them anyway, to put a real, not, Annie talked about don't let your junior account manager handle social. Unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits are still in the position where, if they hire someone who's doing social is one part of 17 different hats that they wear, and they'll get there, and I'm sure that there are nonprofits who are doing it well, but they're just harder to find than I would like them to be.
Yeah, I see a lot of people set up Facebook pages and they get really excited, but they don't have the resources to make the channels work for them. And if you don't have the resources, don't open them up, because you're going to get a really frustrating experience, and you're not going to be able to put the time and effort into planning that you need to make them a success. So if you're already strapped, don't even do it. You're just going to get really frustrated.
And it seems like it's sort of a classic chicken and egg problem, in that people are reluctant to make the investment necessary to take full advantage of the channels if they don't have any clear indication of what sort of ROI might be coming, and therefore we just kind of spin our wheels.
Well, this kind of goes, and I don't mean to jump around on some of the questions that we've talked about, but there's this idea of social media. Was it the idea of social media jobs being gone? Jobs like mine being gone in 5 years, and oddly, I kind of agree with that idea, that the social media strategist, the social media guru, whatever horrible name you want to give these positions, I think they will be gone in a few years, and frankly, they should be gone in a few years, because this is all part of an evolutionary process. The social media, too many businesses, too many universities, too many companies overall were tacking on social media as something that someone who drew the short straw was doing, or the secretary was doing, or the junior intern was doing. And so it was necessary to help social media grow up, to pull these positions out, really give them focus, resources, a full-time position to be able to help these things grow. But as there's an evolution in social, we've been talking about it here, everything needs to be integrated anyway. So the places that are doing them well, you should, at a few years down the road, the next couple iterations of this, you shouldn't be a social media, a social media person who happens to be part of the marketing or communications department. You should be a marketing or communications person whose specialty is social media, or all of your writers should be. It should be part of the daily duty that when they're writing a feature for the website homepage, social media needs to be part of that. So I think eventually it's going to, it kind of pulls out, and then as it's done, as it's done well and evolves, it should all integrate back into itself.
So when it disappears, it's not going to be because it's being marginalized, but because it's being completely internalized.
Or more to the point, everything else is going to be internalized by social media.
Right, right. It's socialized. Everything becomes socialized.
Yeah.
I would sign up for that in a heartbeat. Excellent. Well, Ian and Annie, thank you. We're just about out of time, and I really appreciate your taking the time to chat with us this afternoon. We are now at the end of our hour. Ryan Catherwood will be back in 2 weeks with a great show. He and his guests, Tom Dominic of Duke and Wendy Hathaway from University of Wisconsin-Madison, will be talking about using social and digital in campaigns. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, iModules and M. Stoner. As always, you can watch more shows from Advancement Pros on the Advancement Live archive located at higheredlive.com. Thanks to everyone who tuned in live, and see you next time.
Thank you.